Okay, the biggest thing about thesis is this is the first time in their academic career where they are coming up against something that's open-ended and is not fully prescribed. In a typical undergraduate course, they're basically told what to learn and when to learn it. A thesis is really quite a bit different than that. So, as a result, something can happen because there are no deadlines. There are a few. Now that we have a more structure to the thesis, there are some deadlines, and that's helpful. But really, in the research itself, there's no formal deadlines, and you should have this done by next week. And students typically don't do very well with that lack of structure. So this is the first pitfall, their failure to recognize that lack of structure and do something about it. So a good supervisor, recognizes that and tends to parcel it out in smaller pieces. But ideally, what students will do is they will find a time each week, ideally, that is dedicated to thesis and make the time to work on it. That doesn't always happen, but that's the ideal situation.
I think a lot of students, since they're working on a thesis, maybe individually, they think that they have to address everything by themselves, and if they get stuck, they feel it's their problem and they have to address it, and there's no help out there. But I really encourage students that when they hit some roadblocks or some interesting problems, to contact myself or even discuss amongst the other students in the lab so that they don't get stuck in those problems. They get outside help to help them move along in their thesis. So I think it's this kind of, it's a full year project. So some students may think initially, I have a long, I have a lot of time to actually complete and work on the project. But of course, because it's full year, it also has, a lot of contributions that you do have to make in that time frame. So I think what students sometimes tend to do is wait until the last minute or wait until the second semester before they start really working hard on the thesis. And I encourage students to start right away. And as I mentioned before, to dedicate a certain amount of time every week to the project itself, and use that time wisely so that near the end of the semester, the second semester, they don't feel like they're overloaded with a lot of things, especially nearing graduation. So I think it's important to kind of stay, create a timeline and stay on track.
So one is assuming that you can wait until reading week to get your thesis done. It doesn't work that way. It's you can't do a good thesis starting in reading week. So I would say start early. In fact, I prefer my students to come in the summer before thesis and spend the summer in the lab to get familiar with the techniques and equipment and assays that they'll end up using. I think that works the best, and then they're working on the project for a full year or even longer if they stay on after thesis for the summer after thesis. Those are the students who end up producing publications, first author publications, and going to conferences and things like that. So get an early start, I think, is important because, particularly for experimental work, you can't just cram it into one week or start it near the end of the term. That's a big pitfall. I think that's the main one, just not keeping up on things. I think communication and writing reports and so on, leaving those to the last minute is often a problem. I'm always willing to help revise and read drafts of reports that you have to produce for thesis or the one-page research proposal you have to produce for an NSERC application, for example. But it's difficult for me to give constructive feedback if I get it the night before it's due, right? And so going through those and iterating on those reports, I think, is an important learning experience, but also just ends up with a better thesis product. So I think it's the same as anything. Start early, allow yourself time to revise, and give yourself time to do the work in order to do quality work.
So one is this aspect of just doing all the work over Christmas and over reading week, or in fits and spurts, not making consistent progress. That's a common pitfall. And another is not leaving sufficient time for the writing of the thesis document itself at the end. I sort of say this to a lot of my students, that it doesn't matter how brilliant the work you do is, if you don't put it in the thesis document at the end, nobody will ever know about it, including me necessarily. So I mean, I recommend to them that they start writing that document 2 months or more in advance to the end of the second semester, or the final semester. Even if it's a single semester thesis, they've got to allow many weeks for writing that document. Provide me with a draft, if at all possible, and give me time to read it. You know, don't give me a day to read it. Give me time to read it, and give yourself time to take my feedback and revise it. I mean, it's that whole process that I see as the main value of doing an undergrad thesis.
Thanks for watching. You might be interested in another video in this series, or you might want to watch the uncut full-length interviews with our instructors. To do this, select pause to stop the video, and then select on a button or an image.